For those of us that use a power meter with our riding, the go-to metric to track your progress is often FTP. But there are various other methods and concepts that you can use to monitor your fitness levels. And one of them is critical power. So in this video, we're going to take a closer look at it to see why it's valuable to use and understand whilst you're training. Before we get into critical power, let's take a quick look at FTP, which is a metric that many of you may be familiar with already. Now, FTP was designed to use power meters as a way of estimating an athlete's fitness through simple testing and tracking of power numbers. It's based on an individual's power output in watts or kilojoules per second at maximal lactate steady state, or MLSS for short. MLSS represents the highest exercise intensity whereby the rate of lactate clearance matches the rate of lactate production. And it's generally thought that this exercise intensity can be maintained for around 30 to 60 minutes, although some scientists argue that this could be between 40 and 70 minutes. Roughly speaking though, it's the sort of intensity you'd experience on a 40-kilometer max solo effort. And if you want to work it out, a good method to try this is to do a 20-minute max effort, find your power numbers and then divide that by 0.95. Basically 95% of your 20-minute power PB is your FTP. FTP is a brilliant way to understand and track your fitness levels, but there are some pitfalls. Now, you're basing your training zones and your fitness off one single effort, a 20 to 30 minute effort, for example. Now, you may be really good at putting down a 1 minute peak power effort, but not so great at holding your power over 20 to 30 minutes. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, and it doesn't make you a poor cyclist because there's many different characteristics to riding when you get out on the road. Now, for this reason, FTP is great for kind of broadly looking at your fitness levels, but it does give that broad picture and it can miss certain aspects. Critical power arguably provides you with a more detailed look at your fitness levels and physical capabilities. Often abbreviated to CP, critical power is theoretically the power you can sustain without reaching exhaustion. Now, sounds simple, and it is, but the information you can take from this is vast. So picture a graph. You have power here and time here. You can sustain high levels of power for short periods of time and lower levels of power for longer. If you do a series of max efforts across different durations and plot these values on the graph, you start to build up a curve. As the duration of those efforts increase in time, that curve begins to stretch off into infinity, with very marginal differences in power. The line of where that curve stretches off, actually called an asymptote in maths, is your critical power. Theoretically, it's the power you can sustain without exhausting. In the real world, the upper limit of your critical power is what you'd manage to sustain for around 30 to 60 minutes. If you go a little bit harder than your critical power, you begin to blow up and wouldn't be able to continue riding indefinitely. Stay below and you can keep riding in a sustainable way. Mathematically, you can easily derive something called the curvature constant of this power duration relationship. This is termed W prime, or the anaerobic work capacity. This is the amount of energy it takes in kilojoules to get above your critical power by a certain amount of watts for a set duration. If you draw a line up from the x-axis to the point on the graph and across to the y-axis, that whole area above your critical power line is the amount of energy it takes to reach those upper power values. And that energy, or W prime, is the same for any duration of effort above critical power. As an example, if you do a 1 minute all-out effort, you'll use the energy up really, really quickly, but if you do a 20-minute effort, it will be used at a slower rate. Either way, that total energy is the same for any duration of effort above critical power. Each time you go above critical power, the total amount of energy you have available is used up. Think of it as if your legs are a battery. So they have charge, and when you go above CP, that charge is used up. And when it's gone, it's pretty much gone for good. Now, you can recharge your energy levels when you go and drop your effort below CP, but this happens very, very slowly. So basically, when it's gone for good on a ride. Critical power is really useful because it allows you to understand the base for which any effort above a certain power begins to fatigue and exhaust you. You know where your limits are, how far you can push above them, and for how long. You'll also be able to extrapolate from that power curve and create training zones, so you can quite easily see what different intensities you need to ride at when you're out training. You'll also be able to compare power curves from previous tests to see how your performance is changing over time. But anyway, enough from me. I'm now about to go and meet a real expert on the subject, Adam Isherwood from the University of Oxford, who has studied critical power in quite a lot of detail. Let's go and find him. Adam, thanks for joining us. You're currently researching sports physiology, partaking in a PhD at the University of Oxford, so really well placed to discuss critical power further with us. And I'm really interested to know what is physically going on in your body above and below critical power.
Yeah, so fundamentally it boils down to whether your body's in a metabolic steady state. Above critical power, things like your blood lactate and your VO2, things like that, they're continually rising or they're continually falling, respectively, and they'll never plateau. They'll never kind of come to homeostasis, as it were. So these become the determinants of your performance within this kind of above critical power domain, this severe intensity domain. Below it, which is the heavy intensity domain, your determinants of your fatigue and your performance are quite different. So your VO2, so that will kind of continually rise for kind of 10, 12 minutes, but then this will actually plateau as well. It won't carry on going up to your VO2 max, and therefore it'll be a sustainable level. And the same thing with pH, that hits a plateau, same thing with these inorganic phosphates. So what then defines this region is that your capacity to exercise within it is much more reliant on your energy stores. So most pertinently, your muscle glycogen, how much of that you've got, how quickly you're breaking it down, and then depending on the environment as well, kind of thermoregulatory effects as well. So if you're exercising in the heat, then it may be that you end up, your core body temperature ends up raising. That ends up being the limiting factor to the exercise there. And then kind of hydration comes in a little bit with that as well. So we're talking about above critical power, you can exercise for 20 minutes, up to, it varies, 20 minutes up to maybe 40 minutes. If you're very, very well trained, maybe up to an hour. Whereas for the heavy domain, we're talking about from whatever that individual kind of upper threshold time-wise was for the severe domain, all the way through to about 2 hours, even longer perhaps if you've kind of carb loaded heavily or something like that. So they're two distinct domains, and you want to be able to delineate which one you're in for performance and for training adaptations and things like that.
Okay, so basically below critical power, in very basic terms, your body kind of has things under control. It's able to sustain it for a longer period of time. Once you go above critical power, that's when you're going to reach exhaustion relatively quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And why is critical power useful to understand in terms of training? How can we use it to kind of better adapt our performances out on the road?
Yeah, so there's a kind of, there's completely different energetic profiles going on above and below this threshold. And therefore, what's going to determine how soon you come to exhaustion and that, and what kind of power you can put out, it's in a race setting or a training setting, is going to be determined by which zone you're sat in. So you want to be, if you're prescribing your training and you get different adaptations based on these different zones, you want to know where you are. If you're racing, you've got this concept of this W prime, this anaerobic reserve, that's, you've only got a fixed capacity of it that you can burn through above critical power. So you want to actually know where your critical power is as a baseline for that, and then how far you can go above it and for how long. And therefore you can most accurately define your training zones or your racing pacing. So it just gives you greater resolution on what's going to be going on in your body, out on the road, racing, training, interval sessions, hill reps, everything like that. It just gives you a better idea of what's going on under the hood.
So do you think as a whole we're too focused on FTP as a fitness tracking metric, and we're kind of closing ourselves off to thinking about other ways to track our progress on the bike?
Yeah, so it's a good question, because FTP in principle, it's worth remembering, FTP in principle is trying to look at the same thing. It's trying to find this threshold. The issue with it is it's going to too simplistic a measure of doing it. You're looking at a 20-minute time trial effectively, which a 20-minute test for most people is there or thereabouts on your on this critical power, the kind of maximal steady state power that you can hold. But for some people, especially very fit, it'll probably be a bit longer than that. For some people, it'll be a bit shorter. So you can't tell which of these exercise domains you're in. The concept of the 60-minute FTP, so you're taking 5% off your 20-minute, it's kind of finger in the air stuff. It's 60 minutes it's an arbitrary level. It sounds nice because it's an hour. People know what it is, or 20 minutes, it's a third of an hour. But actually, those don't have any physiological kind of specific underpinnings for an individual, because for an individual 20 minutes max effort for one individual, that might be completely different to what 20 minutes is for someone else, because as I say, above and below critical power, you've got completely different physiological processes in terms of fatigue profiles and the mechanisms by which your energetics are turning over. And the other issue with FTP is, well, it's not necessarily an issue, but a limitation of FTP is it doesn't have this W prime aspect to it. So you're not getting this modeling potential above critical power. You can't, when you're going to do a 10-mile time trial, go, pick out the time that you'll think you'll be doing, then you can look at exactly the power that you can hold for that duration, and you kind of fiddle around with it a little bit, and you basically, try and model exactly the power that you're going to be able to sit at, and then you can look at the course profile and say, okay, right, I'm going to burn a certain amount of my W prime here, and I'm going to go a bit easier and reconstitute it here and things like that. So it just gives you, critical power gives you a greater control over how you're riding, and ultimately, FTP it's not a bad approximation, but critical power has a lot more utility, and it's more likely to be more accurate, and therefore you can have more confidence in it.
That's super interesting. I am interested to find out my own critical power. Now, personally, when I look at how you do test for it, it seems a little bit more complicated than FTP, which I think is where FTP's kind of advantage comes from, is it is just very simple, and it's quite a nice way of tracking your fitness in an easy way. But I do want to know what my own critical power is to see how potentially this would have been more useful to myself when I was racing. So my understanding is the best way to test for it is to a 1 minute, 5 minute, and a 15-minute all-out effort when fresh. And then you take those power numbers and you have to input these into an equation. Now, I found a free spreadsheet online by High North, which you can put these values in. It then kind of does the calculations for you, tells you your critical power. What do you think to that? Is there anything different you do to test for critical power?
Yeah, so I think the absolute ideal way to do it is very similar to that, but it's with time to exhaustion trials. So basically you'll kind of pick powers that are going to definitely be above your threshold, which you'll have a good idea of from your FTP or your general riding anyway. Very similar to what you've described. It's 3 to 4 trials where the duration ends up being between 2 minutes and 15 minutes, and you want quite a nice range there as well. So you want there to be at least 5 minutes between the longest and the shortest one. And you just set your turbo on erg mode. Is just how long can you go sat at that power. The turbo is the thing that's setting the power rather than your legs. So you've not got any of these little fluctuations and things like that. And you'll just get the kind of the truest physiological power output. For that power output.
Yeah, so then you would then input those time durations into that critical power equation using the spreadsheet to find your CP, your critical power.
Yes, and then it's literally just putting those dots onto the graph, and then what the calculator will then do is just match a curve to it. Hopefully it's kind of within 5% error, and then from that you're literally just reading off the asymptote, where the line
bottoms
goes.
out.
Yeah, that's your critical power, and then the curvature constant we kind of mentioned then ends up being your W prime, and you've got your 2 parameters for your model, and then you can read off within that. You can then just read off wherever you want, because you've filled in the gaps between it. You've got the curve between it. So if you will say, how long can I sit at X power, you literally just read across down, and you'd be able to see what your duration is for that. There is an alternative way, which is much less time consuming, though it is unpleasant to say the least. There's no no getting around that, unfortunately. So it's this concept of the 3-minute all-out test. It was developed at Aberystwyth, the University of Wales, by Annie Van Hatelo, Joe Dunstan, Mark Burnley, and it's unpleasant. It's an all-out effort. There's no pacing at all. It is literally, you go as hard as you can from the off, and the idea here is you actively burn through your W prime, you burn all your matches, and then all that's left at the end of the test is your critical power. All you've got, all the power you can put out is just coming from oxidative metabolism, and it's so that you're still working as hard as you can, so it's the maximal rate. And this has been shown to correlate and to predict your critical power and your W prime really quite nicely in a much more time efficient manner.
Okay, Adam, testing protocol sounds pretty brutal, if I'm honest, but sounds quite interesting as well. So I'm going to give it a go myself, set it up and see what my critical power is via the 3-minute test you just described. Only one thing for it. Thanks for joining us though. I'm going to try to find my own critical power using one of the methods you can use at home. So this one is a 3-minute all-out test, and I've heard it's pretty tough. So I'm a little bit nervous. I've heard it's the toughest test you can possibly do in terms of power tests. So I'm going to run you through it. Basically, it's very simple. 3 minutes, all out, no pacing whatsoever. So set your resistance on your trainer to around your normal threshold power. So for me, it's about 400 watts. Set that as constant, with a good warm up before you set it as constant. Then when you attempt the test, all out from the gun, as hard as you can go, up the cadence around 110, 120 revs per minute. Just go all out. Do not pace it whatsoever, and keep going until the 3 minutes is up. So you should see your effort gradually ramp down, ramp down, ramp down into a slow decline and painful end to the 3 minutes, which is why I'm a bit nervous. So I'm gonna jump on the bike now and give it a go. Oh, one thing I forgot to say, you need to do this rested. So as if it's a race, make sure you eat right in the build up to it, carbo load, and also fuel right just before. So I'm getting a little gel in now. Nice easy one to consume as well. Ready? It's kind of cool, this little side fit. Credit card gel. Oh. One-handed. Perfect for riding with, and also holding cameras in the other hand. I'm procrastinating, aren't I? Okay, warm-up is underway, and what I want to see here is the last 30 seconds of this 3-minute effort. So I'm going to take the average of that 30 seconds, and supposedly all the research is pointing to the fact that that average will be my critical power. Bit of pain to get through first before I get there though. 10 seconds to go. Then it's just all out in the saddle, getting the cadence to 120. Here we go, right. Okay, that's just all out. No pacing allowed. Done. I mean, it's nice doing a power test in 3 minutes. You could spend 2 hours doing it. But oh my gosh, did that hurt. Whew. Let's see what I managed. I'm done. Critical power, 372 watts. Absolutely horrific. A little bit more than I thought it would be actually. You really see my power spike and then it just gradually just drops. Literally the exact same as the critical power chart, looks the exact same. Interesting, but very painful. Okay, that was a closer look at critical power. I really hope you found this video useful, but please let me know in the comment section below, what fitness metrics do you use to track your progress out on the bike? Do you use FTP, critical power, or maybe something else? And if you did like this video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, and we'll see you on the next one.